Good morning, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for Monday, July 20th, 2015. Let's start today's tour off with a look at the sea surface temperature anomalies. Check out the El Nino that has grown substantially here in the tropical Pacific over the last several weeks and months. In fact, the entire northeast Pacific, very warm compared to where it should be, and this has created all kinds of interesting things going on, especially in the southwest United States here, and even more so into Southern California. I'll get into that in just a minute. This is probably going to strengthen further, and this El Nino very likely going to reach strong thresholds, maybe even record-setting, and that's going to be very, very interesting for lower 48 weather, global weather on a larger scale, and then the hurricane season in the Pacific. All kinds of interesting things associated with this growing, burgeoning El Nino. Notice, too, some interesting things in the Atlantic. This cold area right here is getting smaller, and I'm not going to make too much of it, but I notice these kinds of things. We're starting to fill in just a little bit the main development region here with a little bit of positive anomalies. One thing is for certain, to kind of prove that I'm not just reaching here, we do have some cold anomalies here, but we don't see anything that looks like this, where it's just ridiculously cold. I mean, look here, right along the equator between Africa and South America, much colder anomalies way down here than we're even seeing through this region. And, as I've mentioned in the last couple of weeks, we have warmed things up ever so slightly off the coast of Africa out several hundred miles, and even the Caribbean Sea starting to warm just a little bit. And to further my point, this is what it looked like about a month ago. See the difference there? Large area of cold anomalies in the main development region a month ago, and look how it's changed. So maybe that'll change the course of the hurricane season ever so slightly if we don't have quite as much cold water compared to average out here as maybe was once thought we were going to have. Then maybe when we get to the peak of the season, starting in about a month when things really start to ramp up, this will start to come into play, and it could add another hurricane to the overall numbers. We'll have to wait and see. Warm water temperatures alone do not give us hurricanes. There have to be plenty of other factors in place, including light wind shear in the atmosphere. Instability has to be pretty significant. You can't have a stable atmosphere. But the warming water temperatures compared to what we've seen a month ago certainly give me sort of a, all right, well, that's interesting. We'll see how things go. Looking at another important parameter, and this is important on a different scale here because the other maps were showing the surface of the ocean. This is the tropical cyclone heat potential, which measures the amount of energy not only at the surface but at depth. So we're not talking about just the skin of the ocean, but in some cases, several hundred meters deep. And what I wanted to show you here, anything typically above and into the middle and upper parts of the scale here is considered decent ocean heat content. Water temperatures of 80 degrees or higher are typically needed, and then if it's 80 degrees below the surface by several dozen to a couple hundred meters deep, then you have a lot of ocean heat content available for the ocean to be churned and the wave action to come in and mix everything up, and you're just mixing in more warm water instead of mixing in colder water just below the ocean surface. So check it out. The Gulf of Mexico pretty much primed as it should be. We typically see it that way. Caribbean Sea has a lot of ocean heat content, but right here off the east coast, the southeast coast, we are seeing a pretty good increase in oceanic heat content, more so than we saw last year, and it has spread out to some extent. You can see a little bit of that heat content building into the Atlantic. That includes the Bermuda area out here. So the heat content values in the western Atlantic definitely going up and are probably a little bit higher than they should be, not by much. And I mean, we can go back and look at the anomalies here, and this again is the surface, but that translates a little bit to what's going on below. And you can see the entire subtropical Atlantic here in the Gulf running quite a bit above the long-term average in terms of the surface temps, and then that translates very well. You can see here to deep ocean heat content starting to fester if you will, off the East Coast, right off of Florida, and of course the Gulf and Caribbean, as I mentioned. This is going to start to become important as we get on into the meat of the season. If we have 1, 2, 3 hurricanes, and they all happen to form in the western Atlantic for some reason, because this area might be hostile, then this becomes very important. So we'll keep monitoring this over the next several weeks, of course. Now, in the Pacific, the El Nino and the indirect relationship, the El Nino really doesn't cause the eastern Pacific up here to warm. I showed you all that warm water. Take a quick look at it once again. Remember, this is the El Nino down here along the equator, but the eastern Pacific as a whole, the northeast Pacific, very warm, and that has led to several strong hurricanes here off the coast of Mexico. The most recent was Dolores, and the remnants of Dolores made it up here to just off of Southern California. The low-level center is pretty much dissipated, and the mid-level energy with the moisture associated with it has been sort of sheared off, and it's come into the southwest United States. This is a water vapor shot, and you can see there's a lot of moisture there over Nevada, Utah, up into Idaho, and that passed over Southern California over the weekend. We had some flooding issues that was extraordinary. Wickenburg, Arizona, just north or so of Phoenix, had a lot of flash flooding issues. The washes filled up with water very quickly as this tropical air mass that was transported out of the tropics down here up into the subtropics, really, and off the coast of California, of all places, was able to get that moisture into areas that typically don't see precipitable water values as high as they were. And so this El Nino is going to be heralded as maybe the saving grace for California with a lot of rainfall. But I'm here to tell you, you have to watch out for that, because a lot of rain in these desert areas is going to equal catastrophe from time to time on a local scale. Hopefully not on a large scale, but certainly it could happen on a local scale. You think about what I was saying in Wickenburg, Arizona, the people around there, I didn't see if there was any loss of life or any injuries, but there was certainly property damage. There's definitely property damage in Southern California. So while this El Nino may bring beneficial rain through either just the general weather pattern or by these tropical cyclones getting up here and then depositing their moisture in this area, it does come with a price. Just keep that in mind. In the current situation, the tropical Atlantic, really nothing going on right now for the next 48 hours. And if we click on the 5-day graphical tropical weather outlook, it too is nice and blank. Not the case in the Pacific, as I mentioned. This water temperature profile out here, very warm compared to the long-term average, and thus we have another system trying to develop here, almost a certainty that it will do so, head off to the northwest. Again, some of that moisture, even though this will be a little bit farther away, will get advected or transported horizontally up into the southwest United States. How much remains to be seen, but when you have this many systems developing in this fairly close proximity to the west coast of Mexico, the Baja, and Southern California, you do have to pay attention to what these systems do. They don't have to come in and make landfall to make a big impact. You know, they can stay well offshore, like Dolores has done, and still bring considerable impacts to areas hundreds of miles away, even after the system has been declared post-tropical and basically dissipated as a tropical cyclone. Looking into the eastern Atlantic. Now this is interesting. We definitely have the tropical waves of low pressure, but the stable air mass, there's still some Saharan air layer sitting out here, but this is not nearly as strong and stifling as it has been. Still there, but not quite as overwhelming, I guess is a good way to put it. There's a tropical wave here, another good envelope of energy here, and another one here trying to come off Africa over the next several days. And all of these will make their way westward over time, and they're going to end up somewhere. Probably the eastern Pacific before too long, these little impulses of energy. And they're actually not little. When you're looking at how large of an area we're looking at here, thousands of miles across, these are pretty large pockets of energy that come off and move westward, these tropical waves or easterly waves. And we have to watch these because they can end up in an area that suddenly becomes favorable in the western Atlantic. If this region is shut down, you have to see where they end up later on. Looking at the different MJO or Madden-Julian oscillation forecasts, The GFS still insisting that we leave the null phase, excuse me, where there's not much MJO activity anywhere, to an amplification and then kind of hanging around right along the borders of phases 1 and 2. And that would generally support development in the Western Hemisphere, the Atlantic Basin, so we'll have to see. But conversely, the Euro, it's finally starting to catch on that maybe there'll be an amplification into phases 1 and 2, but it's clearly not as strong. If we go back and look at the GFS versus the Euro, it's not quite as amplified, so we'll see how this evolves. This goes out, by the way, to the first couple of days of August. And the MJO is basically the easiest way to define it for you, a period of upward motion in the atmosphere that allows tropical convection to rise and not be sheared off. Instead of sinking motion, which suppresses tropical development, you get a rising motion. And when you see an amplification such as this in the Western Pacific, which happened in recent weeks, you get a lot of tropical cyclone activity typically. It's not a guarantee, but it helps. And so we'll have to watch this, the GFS a little bit more aggressive. And to that end, this is a really nice little snapshot 10 days out from the European model, the ECMWF. And we're looking at a surface map plus the 850 millibar vorticity, which is a fancy way of saying spin in the atmosphere or energy at about 5,000 feet up. And lo and behold, there's a little tropical system here knocking on the door of maybe Tampa. Another one kind of reminds me of Arthur off the coast of North Carolina. Maybe another little impulse out here to the north and east of Bermuda, which is right there. Now, this doesn't mean this is going to verify. This tells us, hey, the window for tropical cyclone development may be opening. And if we go back and we look at the Euro here, a little bit of an amplification in the MJO for phases 1 and 2, which history shows us typically favors the Atlantic Basin this time of year. And then we start seeing this showing up in the long to medium range on the Euro, for example, which is considered to be a very reliable global model. We have to pay attention to it. So towards the end of the month, we might start seeing the opportunity for something to develop in the Western Atlantic Basin. And we'll obviously address that as we need to. All right? Well, that is it. A lot was covered today. Hopefully you learned something. And you're up to date. That's the most important part on what's going on in the tropics. I am headed to Miami, Florida this week to meet with the National Hurricane Center on some storm surge related projects that we have going on. And so I probably won't have another update until Thursday morning. Once I get down there, I'm doing some traveling. Not much going on to worry about between now and Thursday, fortunately. So I think everything will be fine. So that's it for now, and that's it until Thursday. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. Thanks as always for tuning in. Have a great few days between now and Thursday, and then I'll talk to you then on Thursday morning.